Great. So yeah, I think we're still getting some people trickling in, but we are excited to kick things off. So we'll just start with a little bit of kind of background and introductions. Hopefully you all are joining us in kind of like nursing chocolate hangovers today. We wanted to, wait until after the holiday and spend some time with you all, with our users. I think most of you all are probably users already. I think I see a customer here as well. So this is the first of a bi-weekly series that we're hosting here at Notably. So for those of you who might not know much about Notably, we're a app that helps researchers to collect, analyze, and share their research. And these sessions were inspired by all of the one-on-one conversations that we've been having recently with researchers from across lots of different backgrounds and industries. And we were wanting to create a space where we could maybe open up a chance for connection and conversation with a bigger group. So we're using this space every other week to dive into different topics that we're thinking about, that researchers are talking to us about, that we're learning about. So for example, in today's workshop, the first part of the session will be talking about insights. So just, a dive into what role insights play in research, and hoping to inspire a little dialogue or conversation about that with you all. And then in the second part of the workshop, we're going to take a look at Notably. So we'll kind of walk through some of our most loved or popular features, and are using this as a space to also give you all a sneak peek of what we're working on. So I'm hoping that, this will be a helpful chance for you all to see what's in the works, and hopefully hear some feedback from you all as well. So we'll go ahead and jump in. Oops. So here hosting is myself. So my name's Brittany Fuller. I'm the co-founder and CEO here. And Allison is our co-host. So Allison, say hello.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and with all of you guys. My background is in product design and research. Have led some pretty big research programs over the years, and am bringing some of that knowledge with me here today to share with you guys. So excited to experiment with this format. And like Brittany said, please feel free to give any feedback that you have. If you like them, keep doing them, as long as there's people here. So
and Allison and I were wanting to, obviously use this as a chance to encourage conversation across, the users that are here, and we're wanting to be part of that story. So I'm hoping to be transparent and candid with you all about everything that we're working on and the challenges that we have from our perspective. So like Allison mentioned, her background is in research and design. Mine is in research and product management. So, little bit of secret origin story since you all are here. Allison and I have actually known each other for almost 10 years now. We've started another product together before in the past. We've actually shared 2 of the same bosses. So we're excited to share our story, building Notably as well. So this is the agenda for today. We tried to break this up into small chunks and leaving lots of room for discussion. So like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about insights and kind of breaking that into 2 sections. So one, what are they? We'll take a look at some of the good definitions that we use, and then also kind of jump into some of the more practical side of how to actually write, compose, the mechanics of what makes a good insight. And then, at the end, we'll hopefully have time to take a look at some of the features that we'll be launching within the next week or so at Notably. And we'll start here. So we're going to be talking about insights, and this is one of the illustrations and sort of concepts and themes that we talk a lot about this idea of a timeless problem. So ever since the dawn of time or the emergence of sort of social groups or languages, we have been coming together to figure out, what are the problems that we're facing in our day-to-day, and how can we have conversations and use research and data to figure out, what does it mean and why does it matter? This function is something that we believe is core to research, and it's something that was relevant 500 years ago. I like to say it will be relevant 500 years from now as well. So this is going to kind of continue. This function of formal research will continue to kind of be the way that we discover new things and solve the problems that are sort of waiting for us in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, Allison, I'm going to turn it over to
Yeah.
you. We're going to talk more about research insights.
Yep, that sounds good. So first, I think kind of stepping back before we start talking about the output of research, talking a little bit more about that messy middle of analysis and synthesis. And when we think about where that happens in the research process, on the left here, you can kind of see like you're combining what you saw and what you heard, your observations, your interviews, all of that good stuff with what you think and what you feel. And when you're combining that process is called the sense-making process. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir because you're probably all researchers, but just for the room, this process is where that sort of sense-making happens in the synthesis. So, and then the output of that is our research insights, right? So like, what did we learn from the research and what are we going to do about it? And so then we think about like, why we're synthesizing the data. It's really to make meaning out of it, right? To turn that information into knowledge and to make sense of all the mess. And when we think about how we can define, I guess, the word insight, we think of it simply as an insight that is something that shares knowledge and inspires action, because they're kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Like you can have the knowledge, but if you're not doing anything with it, then it's not, in our opinion, kind of like a very well-written insight. So yeah, and moving on to sort of like what is comprised of an insight statement, it's more than just an observational statement. So we have observational statements that are just what you saw and what you heard, but then you're kind of layering on your opinion and your unique point of view, and it's something that's also actionable. So something kind of sticky and memorable that really provokes new ideas. And is sort of like I guess the gateway into the next phase of the design process, where you get to do the fun part of ideation and solutionizing. So I think this also illustrates, I guess, like where it falls on sort of the process. And it's kind of interesting to think about how, like, the entire time you're conducting research, you're really sort of holding back, and you're objective and methodical and unbiased as you're conducting and performing the research. And then there is this sort of switch that happens to the next phase, where you are almost able to unleash your creativity and synthesize everything that you've seen into sort of findings. And I think we were talking about this before we got on the call, and I kind of picture it as like, horses at a race, they're trying to just hold back and take it all in and resist the urge to sort of jump to any conclusions. And then once that sort of those gates open, it's, full steam ahead into that creative process, where you can really be kind of layer on your storytelling and creativity to then inspire your team.
Yeah, I love how you sort of point out the distinction between these two phases of perspective. I think as someone who has also been sort of involved and responsible for the solution side of things, that this is something I try to sort of remind myself and coach myself to stay, in sort of especially when the data is still coming in, not sort of coming to any conclusions, not even trying to let my brain go there until we have the data, but then sort of flipping this switch once the data is in, and we're kind of wrapping up that synthesis phase to start thinking about like, okay, now it's time to sort of bring my full self to this problem.
Yeah, exactly. And Carter just mentioned something in chat. Divergent and convergent thinking balance is so important, which I think is a great reminder for the group.
Awesome.
Yep. So I thought this would be helpful to kind of like provide a framework for thinking through crafting an insight. And obviously this is a very simple version of that, but you can think of it as like what we saw, what we heard, what it means, and why it matters. So just to walk through this example, we saw, so I actually did some research at a museum a while back, and this kind of inspired this example, but we saw her using her phone at the museum exhibit. And the interesting tension there is that she said that she avoids using her phone at the museum unless she's taking pictures. So that like kind of delta or that tension there is sort of like the kernel of an interesting insight. So why is there sort of like this, I guess, conflict between what she's saying and what she's doing? And so an inference of that might be that users reach for their phones to access more information about an exhibit, even though they don't want to. So then what are the implications of that emerging insight? Why does it matter? What are we going to do about it? It's maybe the museum needs to offer better ways for users to dig deeper into content without relying on their phones. So then you can kind of cycle through this and come up with different implications and different ways that this sort of like sets a future principle for your design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think where we have used this sort of 2x2 framework in the past is in looking at data, qualitative data coming from sort of a journey map or an experience, because there's so much richness, I think, in talking to someone as they're going through an experience like this one, and then kind of being able to layer these questions onto every part of that. I feel like that's where we've seen that journey map experience create a lot more just sort of depth of data.
Absolutely.
Cool, I think, oh yeah, so this is where we have just some questions that we wanted to pose to the group to get started, and kind of take about 10-15 minutes or so to just kind of marinate in some of these ideas together. So we put these questions here as sort of a conversation starter, and these are pulled from our definition. So really quickly jumping back here, going back to this definition of what is an insight. And this is something that we have been talking about a lot, not just, what is an insight, but trying to bake in some quality assurance to this definition for us and how we think about an insight. So we tried to create this simple definition, but even when we looked back at it, we saw like, okay, there's still a lot to unpack here. For example, new knowledge. What does that actually mean? So we were discussing this recently with another researcher about how, sometimes there will be research efforts that are sort of invested in and executed on and brought back to a team where you get a sort of, I think the spirit behind what we're saying is like an insight being more than an oh duh statement. So the fear of, going out and finding, learning the things that people say they already knew, or, sort of that oh duh, like, yes, we already knew this. So this impetus of being new, we also, this idea of knowledge, kind of unpacking that a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to go back to this question here. Allison, do you want to sort of take a swing at answering these, or does anyone want to chime in about sort of how you all have been thinking about insights and how to measure sort of the difference between an insight and an insight that's great?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely be curious to hear from the room if anyone's willing to chime in, but also just understanding how you measure the ROI and the impact of research. We recently did some research with like executive leaders, like design leaders, and one of the questions was kind of like, how do you measure ROI? And a lot of them were kind of like, well, we don't, or we don't, but it's fine. It's and it's like, well, is it fine? Like how can we, I guess, like put some parameters around like what is considered an impactful insight or impactful research, and how do you, and like what things might you measure that against? So like, was there a change of strategy because of this research? Was this research the foundation for more research? Or was a product feature built around this research? Are those are all indicators of something being impactful and valuable. So just curious if anyone else uses any sort of parameters like that in their company to kind of measure, I guess, like quality of research or shelf life. I'll kind of give space to allow people to chat. Looks like Carter, feel free to unmute, like anyone. This is a open kind of space to talk, but also happy to just read whatever you put in chat.
I think something I've seen recently, I'm curious if others have seen this, is the setting up the, like, I don't want to say infrastructure, but just like setting up the basis of research to be measured, and be it more of like that qualitative kind of like fuzziness around like product direction, or your chief product officer took your work and was like, we're gonna do this new work, etc. And instead like being able to measure it from like trending, ongoing research, like monitoring research, like that, like feature development, and just trying to understand like why that matters, I guess. And I feel like those are like potentially the two divides of like, did a bunch of work recently that's going to change product direction, inspire new research, new efforts, but it's like that's only measured within that effort, and it's not really seen as like research overall. But that split of like quantitatively measuring but also qualitatively measuring, I think, is a key point that you all brought up.
Yeah, definitely. The idea of measuring in sort of the status quo of, you know, research data practices is definitely fuzzy, right? Especially when, you know, a lot of the outcomes of research end up in reports, PowerPoints, folders in Google Drive. So I think you're absolutely right about the sort of intentional infrastructure that's needed to sort of measure how this data ends up surfacing again. We were thinking you could even sort of go more top of funnel. So one thing that we've heard from researchers in sort of that PowerPoint graveyard environment is that they're sort of worried that people are experiencing their insights during the readout, but then never really hearing from them again. And so when we think about defining knowledge, there's something sort of collectively implied in this idea of knowledge. So this question of like, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, like if you create an insight, but people aren't, you know, consuming it and having that sort of shared experience with it, is it really even qualifying as knowledge? So we think that there's something, you know, very top of funnel that we're interested in helping, you know, researchers measure in terms of like, are people reading these insights? How often are people reading them? Like who's reading them? And then from there, it's really interesting to get into like, how is this knowledge sort of being applied? But I'm not sure we have many answers around that just yet.
I think it's hard with the like way you set up research like repositories too, and like how you like uncovered those efforts and like how they're used. Because I mean, it's easy to say like the OKR was to do this and we did that, and like that's some kind of measurement, but to your point, it does kind of fall flat potentially if it's not continually used or kind of brought in again.
How, and I think one of the questions that we wanted to pose to the group, which I think, Allison, we ended up coming back to a really simple question, but we were curious, like, what are you all doing to improve the quality of your insights? So what kind of guardrails are you putting in place, or QA processes that you might be using to just, yeah, introduce maybe more quality control, trying to sort of hedge against things that you might already know, or create more impactful insights? And one thing that when we were trying to answering the question, we thought of was like going back to the research plan, which is, we've even made the mistake of thinking that we could go into research without kind of spending a thoughtful time on creating a plan. And I think looking back on the more impactful insights that we had, it was because we spent time kind of upfront making sure that we were on the same page about the questions that were important for us to answer, and like making sure that we really didn't already know the answer to those questions.
Yeah, because we've definitely in that research without a plan, you still learn things, but yeah, sometimes there are like, oh duh, things that you've learned, and it's maybe not the most focused and useful output. So cool. Well, why don't we, unless anyone else has any other thoughts to add, we can kind of move to the next part of the session. Let me see here. Some people are chatting, controlling yourself not to try to learn so much. Yeah, I know. Well, it's hard sometimes to resist like the curiosity and not to try to go too far outside of the focused plan. Cool. So something I wanted to point out while we were here with you all is our new sort of like roadmap, and also a feature request board. So you can actually, like, if you have any ideas or thoughts as you're using the product, you can log those here and they go directly to us. We get a notification in Slack, and and we're very, I guess, active there and here. And we actually had a few feature requests come in last week, and they're already live or they're going to be live in the product this week. So yeah, feel free to, I'll share the link in the chat here in a minute, but feel free to submit any feature requests that you might have and kind of take a peek at the roadmap to see what we have in the works. So yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, so from here, we wanted to sort of show you all around. So we're going to do a quick demo in our development environment. That way you can also see a sneak peek of what's being released this week. So I know some of you may have already seen Notably, but we're going to try to keep things pretty high level, and we have time for questions along the way. So I'm going to jump out of this one. Give me just a second. Okay, so yeah, switching directions. Actually, let me make sure I'm in, yes, I'm in our development. So if you are already, I think most of you seem like you're probably already users. If you haven't had a chance to sign up for Notably, can definitely and should go and do that today. You can sign up for free. Most of the features all of the features that we'll be looking at, you can actually use for free. So and if you have any questions about anything in the app, you can always reach out to us. We're super happy when we get questions via our support down here. So you'll always hear from either me or Allison. So yeah, really quick, we're going to kind of run through starting a research project in Notably from start to finish. So we'll take a look at adding data. We'll also take a look at some of the ways that you can analyze or synthesize that data in Notably. And then once we've got a feel for how to run a project, we'll show you what we're working on. Hopefully we'll have some time for questions, feedback. Feedback is always helpful. So definitely we'll save room for that. But yeah, so to get started, I am going to go into this project that doesn't have very much data here, just to kind of take a look at some of the core features in Notably. So when you open a new project, you'll see here this menu on the left kind of represents your research order of operations for any type of, sort of on the generative side. So going out and doing something like customer discovery, as well as something on the more evaluative side, like user research or user testing. So the first thing that you'll do, so we can give this project a name. We might want to call this beta testing. And then every project has its own info page. This is a place for you to create your research plan with your team. You have templates that you can use to get started, and then you can customize anything that you see here. This is just kind of a best practice baked in so that if anyone is coming back and engaging with this research inside of the repository, they know where they can go to find all of the context of like, why did this research happen? When did it happen? All of that good stuff. And then the next thing is data. So notably, you can use this data section to combine different types of qualitative data. So for example, this might be where you think of adding your videos. So if we click import data, you can upload video files, audio files. You can connect your Zoom account and import your cloud recordings directly from Zoom. And all of those scenarios will create a transcript for you. And you can also use documents. So documents are where I'm going to start. So here, if we click new document, a document is a simple, just kind of open-ended place for you to maybe write your user research notes. You might come here to add any type of like previous research or a white paper. And these documents, as well as the transcripts and other data files, are set up to help you code your data. So, and notably, we talk a lot about the red thread. So being able to sort of connect your research insights or your outcomes to raw data. And one of the reasons why we do that is good data practices, but there's a bigger reason beyond that, which is trust. So we like to sort of believe that the more you can use data management to help someone kind of go on this journey with you, reverse engineer your synthesis process, and give them that kind of granularity that they can understand how you as a researcher kind of came to the conclusions, the more that information will be trusted, received, and hopefully acted upon. So we help you code the data. You can add you can associate your documents with participants. You can also use meta tags here. So this is one way if you wanted to keep track of all of the data that's coming from these documents, such as like a persona or any binary way that you want to classify all of the data. So for example, when you highlight the important information from your documents or from your transcripts, and we click add highlights as notes, I'm going to come right back here and do this again for one of the other files. Oops, not that one. So this one has a different participant using a different tag. So I can actually highlight and tag this something else. So if I wanted to say, actually, this was a really punchy quote that I also want to keep track of. So I can click add highlights as notes. And what just happened is we moved from the data section into the analysis section of the project. So here's where you have a split workspace to work with your data. If you're more of a kind of left brain thinker, methodical researcher, maybe you're working with stakeholders who are just a lot more comfortable working in a table. All of your little snippets of data across your data files get added here, and all of the tags are here. The participant's been coded. This is a link back to the source. So again, kind of following that red thread back, being able to say like, okay, this is interesting, but where did it come from? Tell me more. You can also use AI to automatically analyze sentiment. So this is really powerful because it's super fast, it's pretty accurate, and you can use this negative sentiment as a sort of a cue for understanding where there's room to improve the experience or where there might be a problem or a pain point to sort of ID or solve for. So that's the table. You can also work with the same data. So I just X'd out of there, went into full screen mode over here on the canvas. And one of the things that people really love about notably sort of analysis workspace here is the ability to drag and drop stickies into themes. So if we want to say, hey, these are related in some sort of logic or intuition way, you can start grouping them into themes, and whatever you do in one part of the workspace is going to be copied over into the other. So I'm going to pause here for some feedback or questions. What we're going to do next is go into a different project that has more data so that we can see some examples of what you can do with a larger data set and some of the questions that you can sort of query for.
As a non-user, I have a question.
Sure.
So seeing that there is note taking across the entire interview, correct?
Mhm.
Is there anything based upon questions?
Yeah, that is a good question. Actually, going into the other project, this is something that some researchers have been doing, which is setting up their documents or their places to take notes using the interview guide. So every kind of participant having not just the notes, but the questions as well, and just sort of taking notes in line as people are answering these questions and going back and highlighting the answers afterwards. But we've been, this is one of the things that we've been learning, is that the questions are pretty important and they seem to always be part of this process. So yeah.
There's also like with how you're using tagging here. So like if you do a highlight and then tag it, you can tag it with, I guess, sort of like the question as well. Obviously you would do the full question, but maybe there's like a shorter way to sort of describe that question or that thematic area of like the conversation. And then you can kind of use that as a way to pull apart the data.
Yeah, great question. And so this is the other project I mentioned we were going to take a peek at. One thing I wanted to show really quickly before. So this is some real research that we've done and recently, and so most of the data that's coming to this board for analysis is coming from transcripts. So wanted to give you a quick peek at what transcription looks like, but it works the same way. You kind of set up your data for coding, and then you can make highlights as well. Only difference, we give you the recorder down here. So this is kind of nice to sort of just help you as you're working through those annotations. And then going into it, the analysis section. So this data has already been kind of synthesized. And one thing that people also like is being able to kind of zoom out on your affinity map and get an idea for, where are your largest patterns showing up on your data. So spatially, this data is organized in somewhat of a journey map. So these are things that people are doing kind of before research, when they're kicking off during the interviews, and then afterwards in the analysis phase. And you can, so this might be the kernel of an insight. It's like, okay, I've got some themes here which are bigger than others. Maybe that in and of itself becomes an insight. But you can also take things a step further. So you can use this recolor by feature to recolor by sentiment. This will show you, of your big patterns here or of your journey map, where is your negative sentiment being clustered? You can segment this data. So for example, if you were using, let's say, a persona tag, like one of the things that's pretty common is going out and talking to, maybe a diverse group of stakeholders. So some research that we did recently was like parents, teachers, and students. So maybe you want to see like, how does that measure up? So you can use filters to kind of just narrow down your board. So for example, if we just wanted to see like what people were saying before research happens, there's filters to help you segment, and then there's recoloring to help you kind of hone in on different questions while keeping the context of the rest of your board, which can be a different perspective. So for example, if you wanted to ask, sometimes when we do studies, there's always a person who's more impressionable, more talkative, interesting, whatever it might be. So you might want to ask, hey, are we disproportionately influenced by one of the participants in this conversation? And so you can recolor to see where your participants are showing up as well. So depending on the choices that you make, using tags and setting up the codes here, you have a pretty rich way of pulling apart your data here. I think we have about 10 minutes or so. So maybe what we can do is wrap up the rest of this workflow, take a quick look at insights, and then show you what we're working on. Does that sound good, Allison?
Yeah, that sounds great. Does anyone have any questions? I see some people are leaving some nice things in the chat. Thank you. Appreciate the feedback. This is great.
Cool. So the last thing here, when you're kind of running a research project and you have your data and you've asked these questions and you've seen these patterns, is to go back to that age-old timeless question. What does it mean? Why does it matter? And you answer those questions in notably using insights. So, and notably, insights are a simple place for you to kind of start drafting your observations. So one thing that we might do would be, maybe we're zooming in here on this particular theme, and I have it open in this panel and I'm kind of drafting what we were learning. These insights also have a template, so we help you to kind of bring some structure to how you're writing them. And you can also go into more of a full screen sort of focus mode here in the insight section. And yeah, this is something that we will probably be sharing more about what's in the works in our next conversation. So if you're interested in seeing what's coming next with insights, be sure to join us, not next week, but the following week, because we're really excited about what it means to, so the way we've been describing it is continue sewing with the red thread. So continue kind of threading that data all the way through to insights. So we are using what's called evidence-based storytelling to kind of take these insights to the next level and bring them to life with data. So yeah, we're really excited about that and wanted to show you all something that we're working on actually in the Canvas.
And with that too, if anyone here would be interested in participating in some research, so like more one-on-one feedback on some work we're doing, definitely let me know, because they're going to be recruiting some people soon and would love your feedback.
So I'm just jumping in to these videos that I uploaded right before this call. So yeah, these are not real highlights, but
I want footage of how Brittany does her analysis.
I am going to click add highlights, and I'm going to do that again for one more of the video files, because one of the things that we're working on, or that we're getting ready to release today or maybe tomorrow, I think it might already actually be released, but I have to check. It's coming soon, either today or tomorrow. I keep clicking the wrong one. Is going to help you to just kind of work through larger sets of data on the Canvas faster. So we are very well sort of acquainted with the time that you have to be willing to trade in order to kind of elevate your practice. So working with the transcriptions, we know this takes a long time. We know that, you know, being as methodical can take not just know-how, but also time. So we're looking at, you know, where we're spending the most time, and yeah, this should be a big time saver. I'm going to just create a couple more highlights so that I can show you why that's the case. So as you are maybe pulling in your interviews, one of the things that we usually do, and I'm curious to hear if other people have a different strategy, but one of the things that we will usually do is do the interviews, take the notes, do sort of a short debrief conversation after the calls, if possible, if time and resources permit, and then do our best to annotate the transcript so that we have all of the data to sort of kick off this phase of synthesis and analysis. So that's at this point where we're like, okay, we have all of our data, we're ready to start turning that data into information or something that's more meaningful than just sort of disparate data. And usually that means that we'll upload 5 conversations, we'll go through, we'll make all of our highlights, and then you'll get here where all of your data is sort of chronologically ordered. So using the benefits of the hierarchy relationships that we have in the table. So that will automatically be sort of chronologically ordered, you know, grouped by participants. But the Canvas was another story. So you can see here after I've just made a few highlights on 2 of those transcripts that things are kind of random and weird and messy and piled on top of each other. And the only way to sort of get started, so typically what we might do next is say, okay, if we're working together, I might say, okay, I'm going to start looking for themes in Abla's interview. Allison, you might start looking for themes in John's, and we can come together and figure out where their patterns are. And we'll keep doing that until till we've covered all of the participants. That's just one way. Sometimes we use tag, but the idea is that you really need to be able to get this data pulled apart into some sensible group where you can get started. And so now, notably, one thing that you can do is, so you can use the filter to maybe just drill down and say, I just want to see my, I meant to say Abla, my notes from Abla. And we introduced a new feature, which is probably going to feel like second nature to you all, because if you've used any type of Canvas tool, this is pretty standard, but being able to select a group. So now I filtered down, I have all of my stickies for Abla, and I can move them over to, some other quadrant on the board. This is one example of how we're just saving you some time getting to a better sort of way of getting started pulling apart this data. We also made it so that you can theme. So if, for example, maybe you have some, I don't know, keyword that you want to search for. So this might be, I don't know, I'm not going to get any, took too many random highlights. But yeah, so maybe if we wanted to kind of filter down using search or segmenting by some other tag, you can always create a group and theme as well. So if you say, hey, actually everything with the keyword of Zoom, I want to make a theme out of that, just as a way of starting to make some semblance or meaning. So you can theme this way as well. You can easily untheme. So being able to select these stickies all at once, creating the group, moving them around. We're really excited about this and the time that it should start saving people who are confronted with piles of stickies that make no sense from all of the transcriptions.
This has been something kind of like on our roadmap for a while that we've been, desperately wanting ourselves as well. Just the amount of time we spent moving one sticky at a time. And I think that, it's been interesting working with Canvas-based tools, the things that you sort of think are like, I guess, table stakes and some other products that, I'm sure there's other designers here in the room too. It's just been an interesting kind of adventure with the Canvas and sort of that that is syncing between the table and the Canvas. But yeah, super excited about this feature and hope it will save you time, like Brittany said. Carter
one
said,
of the happy surprises, I just want to add this, Allison. So one of the happy surprises that you all might like as well about this, and so just going back to that example of like, hey, Allison, you start theming, John's interview, I'll start with Abby, then we'll see what overlap we have. So now you can do that a lot easier as well, because if you select 2 themes, you can turn them into one. So this is a way of essentially merging data into themes in a way that feels a lot more fun than having to do it in a table or some kind of process.
Carter asked if command/control click works, but I'm curious, works to do what?
In the grouping aspect, like, can you click like multiple and kind of have them continually highlighted then group, or is it more just drag and like collecting the canvas?
If it's not live yet in this version, it will be. To be able to like, you're saying like you create a selection and then you found an orphan or a straggler over there and you want to add that to the group.
Like going through the canvas like as like one, like almost like putting like a stake in the ground, like a flag of like that's something group.
That is not in this version, but it is on the roadmap.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then we will leave you, so we're at time, we'll leave you with one of the other things. So we mentioned our Canny roadmap, our place for sharing feedback. We got a feature request last week about including sort of like a way to help you jump as you're moving through sort of a transcript. So in this week, we're also releasing a thing that will help you do that. So as you're making a highlight here, this player will sort of keep up with you. So this should entice you all that if you will ask for something or share some feedback there, that we will do our best, and maybe next week we'll be talking, or next conversation we'll be talking about it.
Well, thank you, everyone. It looks like Carter booking a demo to follow up. Definitely. I will maybe, yeah, I'll send you an email and you can book some time on a calendar, on their Calendly. Thank you guys so much for coming. We are going to do this again in a couple of weeks, like Brittany said, so hope to see you then. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Bye, everyone.